I know everyone's just getting settled back in. We're going to continue with the program here so everybody can get on their way to the other GABF festivities that are going around town, and you guys can continue drinking beer into all hours of the night. Before we do that, with your help today, this event has raised some money for the Colorado Brewers Guild. We wanted to bring, round of applause. So, Steve, come on up here. Steve from the Colorado Brewers Guild. We raised over $3,200 for the Guild tonight.
Thanks. Hey, this is cool in two ways. First of all, we're going into our 24th year, and I'm positive this is the first giant check we've ever received. We got our membership meeting this afternoon. I'm going to bring this and share it with our members. We got some board members in the room, and thanks for everybody for this. And this is an equivalent of us about signing maybe 12 new breweries to our membership. So this is really big. This is great for us. So thank you very much.
Awesome. You can actually cash that too, Steve. Yeah.
This is going up.
Or take it to your next golf tournament.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, thank you guys for all the support. We couldn't do it without our wonderful attendees. But let's dive into our last panel of the afternoon. To my left are some wonderful folks from all around the country. We're going to be talking about innovation and just sort of the state of innovation in the brewing industry and kind of where things are headed, both from a product and a business standpoint. Innovation can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, so we're just going to kind of dive right in and pick around in the world of innovation for the next 45 minutes or so. To my left is Blaine Landberg from Calicraft Brewing. To his left is Jeff Heck from Monday Night Brewing out of Atlanta, and I guess Calicraft out of California. And all the way down there at the end is Patrick Rue from the Bruery, which I'm sure many of you probably know. So a round of applause for these guys. So Northern and Southern California represented, and Atlanta. I'll start with an easy one for all of you guys. How would you all define innovation? What does innovation mean to you? And I'll start with Blaine.
Yeah, so it's funny. When we were talking about this, I thought about innovation and how much of a cornerstone it is to us as a brewery. And I think it all started with the first batch of beer I brewed in my dorm at UC Berkeley in '97. So from the very beginning, I was innovating on how the hell I was going to brew beer in my dorm at age 19. But in all seriousness, innovation for us is kind of about how do you think about the industry, and people talk about the white space, but how do you find it? And for us, it's kind of trying to figure out where consumers are going before they know they want to be there. And we look for kind of being in Northern California, in the middle of the wine industry, having grown up right outside of Sierra Nevada in a little town called Willows, innovation and doing something different when it was always kind of touchstone for us. So from the beginning, it's been about looking outside, seeing where consumers kind of may be right now. Then how do you give them something that's of interest that maybe they want it, that they don't even know that they want?
Yeah. Jeff, how about for you guys?
Yeah, so I think for us, innovation really is about having a curiosity about what's possible in all aspects of our business. And so I think that plays itself out in two primary ways. The first is being curious about your failures and about your problems. And so when you encounter a challenge, not just trying to slap a Band-Aid on it, but to approach it as with a curious disposition. What's really going on here? And the second, which has been harder for us over the years, I think is for most human beings, is being curious about what could be better. Because it's really easy when we're having a good year or everybody's untapping our beer really, really well to rest on our laurels, to pat ourselves on the back, and to miss what may be really some of the biggest opportunities. So a lot of what we do is trying to cultivate curiosity, and I think that really for us starts with our culture and with our team.
Yeah. Patrick, you guys are pretty innovative.
We try.
How would you define innovation?
So I think first on the product side, are you making something that's different than the rest of the world? What are you adding to the conversation of craft beer? And then I would say business practices are, for us, direct consumer focus is really important for us. We think that's, it was innovative at the time. I don't know if it's innovative now, but certainly how you bring your beer to market and how you interact with your customers. There's opportunities for innovation, and certainly in branding and all that fun stuff as well. But for me, the heart of it is the beer that you're making.
Yeah, and I think innovation will always be sort of focused on the product itself, but you touched on the direct sales piece, so let's kind of stay there. That was a core piece of your business, and still is a core piece of your business. Can you talk about just kind of the approach that you took early on with direct sales, how it's evolved over time, and kind of what impact that's had on the business overall and what it's allowed you to do?
Yeah, so we started our direct our clubs basically based off of our first Black Tuesday release, where too many people showed up. We did an awful job. People waited a long time and a lot of people didn't get to buy their beer, and it left me feeling like we had failed, even though we had made a lot of money, which is nice. This is back in 2009, we needed the money really badly, and so essentially we said we're never going to treat our customers that way again. We need to let's get them signed up for a club. Our most loyal customers can just have their beer. They can have their beer saved for them. They can buy it online. They can pick it up at their convenience. And they always have access to to what we make. And if anybody wants to get that as well, they can become members as well at some point. So that's kind of transformed into 3 different clubs for us. Since California, or since beer can't be shipped from state to state, California is a good place to be with 38 million people. So I think a club model really depends on what your state population is and how many people are willing to drive to pick up their beer.
Yeah. Blaine, when we spoke last week, you talked about innovation in terms of sort of 3 different buckets. And you kind of categorized them by the consumer, the product, or I should say the production and the process that you guys are making your beers, and just sort of the broader marketplace. Can you elaborate on your approach to innovation in each of those 3 areas?
Yeah, I think I've come to the craft beer industry a little bit different than most. I've wanted to start a brewery since I was 5, which kind of begs the question when somebody says, "What do you want to do when you grow up as a kid?"
I'm throwing the challenge flag on that, by the way.
Dude, so it's true. And on Christmas, when I was in 1983, my uncle and aunt were avid homebrewers growing up outside of Chico. Beer was everything to us. And they brought 3 homebrewed bottles of beer, and one of them had a kangaroo peeing in a bucket that said, "Hoppin' good from down under." And from that moment, I knew I wanted to start a brewery. It's like, literally, there's my team. There's 3 bottles on our wall at our taproom that are from 1983. Am I wrong? No, they're there. That's true. So, the way I look at this from a consumer perspective is, I think that coming from Sierra Nevada and that in the background, and then also being inspired by Dogfish, we look at consumers in terms of especially looking at it from our backyard, right, and those things, and saying like, what do they have? What are they looking for? What are the things that we see them? What do we see them kind of interested in? Clearly, the taproom's a great forum for that. But I also came to it from my first foray into the beverage industry was in the non-alc segment. And so I got to hang around with a bunch of brewery reps while I built a company called Honest Tea for 13 years, and got to see how, from day one, so I'm moving kind of into product somewhat here, but from day one, if I was going to go into the Sierra Nevada beer house with a beer, and I was like, "Hey, I got the best pale ever made," and they're like, "We sell Sierra Nevada, you dipshit," right? And so it was really just kind of like, okay, so first we need to make sure that we're looking at the consumer. What are they interested in? Yeah. How do we pique that interest? From a product side, how do we get something that fits into the marketplace that doesn't exist, and working with the distributors, I got to see what that was. From a production side, we're a little different. We have a small R&D brewery. We work with a couple different contract facilities, which I believe is a great model because I get to play with so many other tools that I would never get to play with before. I did that at Honest Tea too. And I think, so kind of being able to play with different tools, being able to make mistakes and be able to kind of do things that are different from a production side. Lastly would be from a distributor side and route to market. I think that, I fully believe in the 3-tier system. That's just kind of our ethos as a brand. And so for us, it's how do you try to make big distributors small when all they want to do is get big? I think that that's a challenge. And it's about keeping them focused, but like also kind of creating things that are easy for them to execute And having done that for years, I think that that's kind of how we'll be able to look at it.
So a couple questions there. One, what did you learn from Honest Tea, from the non-alc world that you've brought into the beer industry? And two, how do you make a large distributor function as a smaller entity?
So from the honesty world, from the honesty world, that company was all about innovation. It always has been. Seth and Barry did a great job with that. And what I learned from them is twofold. One, try to create products where consumers are going, and do it in a way that you believe in, with values that you stand for. I also think I learned how do you take a product from literally selling it out of my parents' Honda Accord to like selling it with the first craft beer distributor in the North Bay, selling it with Miller Coors houses, to selling out of the Coke trucks and working in Atlanta. So understanding kind of how do you build brand market entry strategies and kind of the routes to market that typically small brewers don't have. I think that's the big stuff I learned from Honest. And then what was the next part of your question?
How do you make a big distributor small?
Oh God, that is the question of the day. I think it has to do with feet on the street and personnel. It has to do with your sales staff and owning your distributors in the sense of don't try to be too many things to too many people. Get your sales staff really focused around building the right routes in the right areas, and then come out with products that are kind of sold directly straight to the retailers you're looking for ahead of time, and they will get small for you. Make it simple. I have a saying with distributors: you can either be small and easy or big and difficult, but you can't be a combination of the two.
Interesting. I like that. Jeff, when we were talking last week, you mentioned that one of the ways that you remain innovative is through problem solving and kind of focusing on and also focusing on the experiential side of the business. So tap rooms and tasting rooms are big for you guys. And that's a great place to get feedback on new product development for sure. How big of a role does the tap room play in the innovation process for Monday night, and how big of a role do you see it playing for other breweries down the road?
Yeah, so we're in a weird spot, being here in Colorado and talking to guys from California. We were not allowed to do direct sales until last September, so which is really interesting. So I don't feel like we're doing anything particularly innovative, but what we are having to do is to re-educate our consumer on what a tap room can be, because a lot of folks don't have the same experience as a lot of your customers do. So I think the first thing is that we've tried to do, we have 2 tap rooms, one at our original production facility, and then we have a one at our barrel aging and sour facility. We also do private events there. And so for us, it's really been being very thoughtful about what does our brand stand for? What do we have the license to do with our customers? And then listening and sort of iterating back. So one little example, we did a few years ago, we started doing this ticketed event we called, that was Monday Night Prom. And the goal was to basically recreate prom for people to make it better than the shitty high school prom that you had when you were growing up.
Pretty easy when you're serving beer, right?
It was super easy. The bar is so low. Yeah. But so it's and our brand is a little quirky, a little fun, and a little tongue-in-cheek and self-deprecating. And so we sell out 500 to 600 tickets. People show up in like really tacky tuxedos and goofy dresses and drink some beer and listen to 80s music. But then we realized like that is what people love about our brand, is the chance to be themselves, to have fun, and to engage with, frankly, the beer almost in that context of our brand takes a little bit of a backseat to the experience people are having and the relationships that are going on among other people. And so once we got comfortable with that, so this week actually is homecoming at Monday Night Brewing. We have our homecoming dance next Friday, a week from today. We've got Spirit Week coming up, so literally you show up in a necktie, which is part of our theme. You get a free pint glass with a glass of beer. So certainly from an experience standpoint, but also product development. I mean, we'll brew about 100 different unique recipes this year out of our 2 facilities, and it's a place where we can test things out. But then I think we've talked a lot about a relationship with our distributors, and what we've really tried to do is let our distributors in behind the veil to see what we're doing, what's coming down, and then to turn around and say, what are the best brands that are performing in our tap room, and how do we leverage them and get them into their hands so they're excited about them as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an awesome opportunity to develop a brand identity and reach out to the community around you. Now, just sort of address the elephant in the room for those who may not have heard. Last week, you guys kind of ran into a bit of a snafu hosting an event in your tap room, and I'll let you kind of explain what happened. But how do you walk the line of hosting events that might offend certain groups while you're trying to build this community and be a place where people can gather and be a spot that is so open for everyone in the community that you're in?
Yeah, so we hosted the quick overviews. We hosted the NFIB, which is a small business organization, trade organization with 10,000 members or so. Wanted to host an announcement of the Republican gubernatorial candidate in our tap room. We said, look, we're not endorsing anybody, but if you want to come by, we're not closing down, but if you want to come by and do your press release, that's fine. We've done that for lots and lots of political candidates. But he said some things that have really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and understandably so. And so we got some blowback from that. And I think that I would say our purpose statement as a company is that we exist to deepen human relationships over some of the best beer in the country. And so when you're in a relationship with someone, whether it's your spouse or it's your neighbor or it's your coworker, relationships and connectedness require vulnerability, and they also means when you get close to somebody, you're going to fuck up sometimes. And so I think what we learned from that is really that if we want to be in a relationship with our neighbors, so we have 2 locations, and one of them is a predominantly black neighborhood that gets is very much tied up in the gentrification conversation in Atlanta. And if we want to have credibility with them, and we want them to look at us as neighbors, and for us to actually be neighbors, we have to have a higher degree of empathy than I think we had in that instance.
Yeah.
But I would say too, like we while we will probably rethink how we do a lot of that kind of stuff, we have no intention of stepping back from the relationship. That remains an incredibly important part of what it is, and this is a chance for us to have a blind spot exposed and move on.
Yeah, and I mean, like we said, sort of at the top of this, innovation takes on a lot of different definitions, and in this case, you guys probably need to innovate in the way that you guys start to approach some of these events that you host. Patrick, in Southern California, you guys also have a pretty robust tasting room, and obviously people show up for their direct sales purchases and their bottle releases and whatnot. What kind of an impact has your tasting room had on the way that you guys innovate on the product side? Like, we've all sort of talked about the feedback that you're able to get. So how do you take that feedback and scale it up and build something that consumers are asking for?
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, we have 2 tasting rooms. We do a lot of small batches. We have a 3-barrel pilot system that has 14 fermenters, so we constantly are keeping the taps full of interesting things that we want people to try. And we do get direct feedback when someone really hates something or really loves something, but Untapped is really good for everybody in the middle. So I find when one of our pilot beers, if we can get over 50 reviews and it's above a 4, we have a winner on our hands. Maybe it still needs to be tweaked, and we'll rebrew it. We'll put it under a different name. We'll see if that one matches. Once you name something, people are gonna review it similarly. There's kind of I think kind of a herd mentality with Untapped. If something's rated 4.5, you're not gonna give it a 2, unless you're an asshole.
In which case, it's a 1.
That's okay. Yeah. I'd be that guy doing that. Vice versa, if something's ranked 2.5, you're not going to give it a 4, unless you're dumb. Yeah. But sorry, I'm insulting all the Untapped users. So it's nice to be able to try all things under different names and see if they receive a similar response, and that's kind of how we see if we have a winner on our hands.
So how do you guys all balance, we've touched on using consumer feedback to develop products and testing things out. Sometimes the consumers that are in your guys' tasting rooms are ahead of the curve. I would probably say that most of the time they're ahead of the curve. So how do you balance the sort of consumer feedback that you're getting in the tasting room with the need to deliver, more mainstream products or products that are more appealing to the mainstream drinker that ultimately kind of help the business stay afloat? How do you balance those two objectives? And I'll start with Blaine.
Well, I think the way that we do it is, I think inherently we all kind of have a fairly decent understanding in terms of if I make this crazy, overly sour, intensely crazy beer, that probably is not going to resonate with the mainstream consumer. So I think that in general, we have kind of boundaries that we've put on our place on ourselves. But the main thing we do is, if you're coming to Calicraft, you're drinking the Kool-Aid already. You know what I mean? So you're like, I'm going to take myself on this journey of crazy stuff. We get it out into different festivals. So if we think it's going to be something good, get it on the festival, see what those people think. And then, for us, it's also our distributor partners, right? Our distributor partners, they sell way more Constellation brands and other things like that than we sell. So, seeing what they have to say about it, too. I think that's... And then lastly, I'd say, and I wouldn't say lastly, but in tandem with distributors, also your retailer partners. I think, having a good conversation with retail from the outset before you put it in market, they're going to be honest with you, whether it's like an intensely craft beer bar that doesn't want anything that you've done consistently but only wants that new thing. They'll tell you what they think. Or you're talking to, the Safeway, King Soopers, Krogers of the world, and you show them your innovation ahead of time and get their response too. I think kind of judging those, that's a good barriers in terms of we understand hey, this has an opportunity or not.
Yeah. How do you guys do it at Monday night, just kind of striking that balance? Because the garage facility is mostly sours and barrel-aged and more esoteric offerings. So how do you balance that with some of your core products?
Yeah, so we have all of our core available at both locations. We kind of think about it as Venn diagrams of we have an identity for the garage, we have an identity for our West Midtown location, and there's some part in the middle. So that looks different in terms of what the kind of what there is to do, what the product mix looks like, what the music is, what the vibe is. And so for product, that core kind of plays a role in the middle. And it's really amazing. I've been shocked how much people still go to the garage and drink 3 Dr. Robots, our core blackberry lemon sour. But one of the things I think that's helpful with that in terms of the tap room is to remember that I think Blaine mentioned it too, but they're not our only constituency. They're not our only customer. And so one of my partners likes to say that innovation begins in Excel. And so, we've done a lot of customer segmentation of saying okay, we have the beer geeks that are here for the 13.9. We're only allowed 14% in the state of Georgia. It's amazing how many of those beers are 13.9%. And so the beer geeks are going to want one thing. Our taproom customers want one thing. We our immediate neighbors, kind of surrounding the neighborhood, care about other things. And then we've actually gone out and quantified what do we think the estimated market is for each of those people. How often do they engage in our brands, in which way? And then we let that drive what we do in the market in terms of our events with retailers, with our different tap rooms. So we really try to get as much data as we can and let them tell us.
Yeah. So, I think all of you guys have probably failed at some point when it comes to innovation and.
What?
No, you've been 100% success rate. And, I think the sort of phrase is that failure is the mother of invention. So maybe talk about some of the times that you guys have failed and how you used failure to your advantage in terms of innovating and just how you balance the inherent need to fail in order to innovate with the obvious need to maintain a profitable business. You can't fail all the time or else you're going to go under. But you need failure to create something amazing. So maybe share some personal experiences of when you guys have failed and where you've gone from there. And I'll start with Patrick.
All right. I have one of those job interview fails. Tell me about the biggest mistake you've ever made. And you're like, okay, I can do this. So for us, Black Tuesday it's our imperial stout that's clocks in around 20% alcohol. It's too large, but it's a fun beer. Essentially, that was a kitchen sink beer. We were just throwing all of our leftover grain into that beer. It was an awful brew day. It was a mistake to make it. There was maybe an inch between the liquid level and the manway on the mash tun. It was just really stupid. And essentially, we put that beer in a barrel. Thankfully, it fermented up to maybe 17%, and then got about 3% alcohol pickup in the barrel. and we thought the beer was terrible. It came around after about a year in the barrel and became one of our biggest successes. So something that I might have dumped out of the fermenter and said, I'm not going to waste, $100, or I think they were $80 at that point, an $80 bourbon barrel in this beer. It turned around. So sometimes mistakes can become good things. But I guess now when we innovate and we try to make mistakes or find cool things and by accident, just do it on a very small scale. And if we don't like it, our tasting room customers aren't going to like it, so we don't move it on. We'll dump it. But if we like it and our tasting room customers don't like it, it's not going to move on to our club members. And it kind of has a chain between. It needs to have a success rate. First with us, then with our immediate customers, then with the larger customer group.
So there is sort of a hierarchy of how you move products through. Then, so it starts with internally, then your tasting room, and then you move it to different membership groups. Is that how you start to develop a brand?
Yeah, unless it's like a rosé and you have 3 weeks to hit that trend. Then you just release something.
Nice. Jeff,
Those are delicious, by the way.
How about for you guys, maybe a story of failure and how you kind of hedge your bets when it comes to failure?
Yeah, so this happens all the time on the product side is probably the easiest example. But we were trying to do a kind of bring back a beer that we had struggled to, or that we had made and had been really successful, and over attenuated, super dry, was supposed to be nice and sweet. And so those are the moments where you can get kind of flush it down the drain. As Patrick said, I would say if you're not flushing beer down the drain on a regular basis, you're not failing enough. And so one of the things we try to do when we say, okay, what are we going to do with this beer, is not have it be a conversation with like me and our brewmaster, but to bring in the broader team, because I think those are places where the team gets a chance to learn and to be educated and also to contribute their ideas. We don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And so we're pretty willing to throw, a shit ton of really expensive Galaxy in that beer and just see what happens. And it's actually been one of our highest rated beers in the last year. So we're actually it turned out to be a success. But I think at the end of the day, if you're not failing, then you're one of the things we do is actually budget to fail. So I think in terms of planning, when we actually budget in for product loss, not just what our loss rates are across our 30-barrel system, but we budget to dump some beer. And so I think thoughtful planning around that can also really help to just to embolden you to make the right decisions.
What does that budget look like as a percentage of your overall budget?
I couldn't tell you offhand. Thanks, Chris. Come on, man.
Well, I guess how much do you allocate to fail, I guess, is really the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think
how heavy do you go on failure?
Yeah, the first year that we did it, we didn't do enough, and then the next year we did it, we didn't do enough again. We didn't budget enough again. So I'm okay blowing through those budgets if they're for the right reasons. And then I think having a pilot system has been hugely transformative to us. I would say if you're at between 7,000 and 10,000 barrels and you don't have a pilot system, then you're going to be it's going to be really hard to innovate. Yeah. Because that just lowers the cost of failure so tremendously.
Sure. Blaine?
Well, we failed a lot, like a lot. And so one of the core beers that we made from the very beginning was a category that we kind of created called California Sparkling Ales, which I just made up, quite frankly.
Nice. That's called invention.
Yeah, there you go. So they're beers that are fermented with wine yeast strains. And sometimes the wine yeast strains don't like the maltose, and sometimes they don't like the honey. And so we had a beer called Berserkly, named after that first batch of beer I brewed in my dorm. And it just took off and became a great beer for us. And I had sourced this amazing star thistle honey that I got from my family's farm. And we were making so damn much Berserkly that I blew through all the stuff that I had bought for the first year. And so I called the beekeeper. I said, hey, man, I need some good honey. Like, you're my guy. You're my connection. Can you give me some good honey? He's like, yeah, I got some good stuff for you. Sound like other conversation I was having at Berkeley.
This was a beekeeper?
Yeah, beekeeper. Yeah, and so
you're in California. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, and so I didn't do the research on what types of honey you're supposed to use in beer. He's like, I got this great buckwheat honey. I was like, all right, buckwheat. For the record, don't ever use buckwheat honey in beer. It tastes like Robitussin, like left out for like 15 days. It's awful. And so we had to dump like two 50-barrel batches of Berserkly. At the time, we dumped like about $17,000 down the drain. My accountant's like going nuts right now. And so, that was one that we learned away. On the flip side, in terms of like how do we find successes, we actually have a beer report in here that is the evolution of that sparkling line. And we were going to make a strawberry-infused beer that was fermented with a rosé wine yeast strain. And the lovely people from Oregon Fruit, who we love, sent us 5 gallons instead of a 50-barrel drum. And so we're like, oh crap, it's already done with primary. We got to put this rosé yeast strain in there. And so Thomas actually pumped in 50 gallons of pink guava puree, and it made with guava trees down. It was like ended up being like one of our best-selling beers of last year, and we now have it in cans.
So getting creative.
I guess.
Nice. Making the best of a bad situation for sure. So we've talked about failure. We've talked about how you guys define innovation. And there's a sort of another piece of that question, which I think I asked on the previous panel, which is differentiating between product innovation and copycatting. And I'm curious, like, how much you guys pay attention to some of the national trends that are out there, be it a hazy IPA or a brewed IPA, whatever is sort of the flavor of the moment that seems to be trending, a rosé ale. And how do you innovate as opposed to copycat or clone? And how do you make sense of that process and make sure that it's right for your guys' individual brands? And I guess I'll start with Blaine, because you launched with California Sparkling Ales. You didn't produce an IPA for quite some time, and then you've sort of gradually moved closer towards some of these trending styles.
Yeah, so, well, it's interesting because I think the taproom also makes you do certain things too, right? So to answer the first part of it, to hit the second part, so I think that what we try to do is pay attention to trends and styles, but then not just copy where that trend and style is going, but try to have our own voice within that segment. So, and I think especially if you have a taproom and you're not making a hazy IPA, then you're missing a big segment of people that are there. So I think the taproom kind of drives some of that. However, that's never a focus for us. I don't think that that's what that is. But what we try to do is like look at the trends, see where they're going, and then kind of innovate towards them. I think when you look at kind of like, we actually have a rosé ale that we've put in, it's a second part of that sparkling ale. And what we did there was we actually made it, we've been making that beer for about 4 years. And we just kind of figured out what it needed to be, and like over time kind of made it more accessible to people. And that's kind of how we kind of looked at it.
Yeah. Innovation versus copycatting. How do you decipher between the two?
Yeah, I think similar to Blaine. I think about if the difference between copycatting and innovation is certainly leverages things that other people have done, but we like to think of that as like we curate great ideas from what other people are doing, but then we have to contextualize it to our brand, to our location, to our people, to our systems. And so if we're not doing something that's our own twist, not only is it not innovative, it's also not practical, because we're not actually acknowledging who we are, what assets we have. And I think one of the things that's really overlooked in our industry too is like our biggest asset is not our brew house, is our people. And so I like to use the analogy of the New England Patriots built their whole system. They have this system that is not about the individual player, but it's about the role. Like, you have your role, and if you're the best tight end but you don't fit our system, doesn't matter. We're not bringing you our team. That's not us. How we want to do it is we want to get great, incredibly curious, thoughtful, hardworking people on our team, and then we build beers, we build experiences around the assets that we have, and the first and foremost is our people.
Letting the people drive the bus.
Let the people drive the bus. I'm a bad bus driver.
Patrick, one of the more innovative products that you guys offer is a beer called Yount, or Yount. It's a beer-wine hybrid that is 51% beer and 49% wine, correct?
Yeah, sort of. 51% wort, 49% grapes by fermentability, then they co-ferment together. So it's a fruit beer.
And
No finished wine goes into it.
And it's packaged in a wine bottle. It looks like a wine. It drinks a whole lot like a wine. can you talk to us about what kind of goes into that product? I mean, because this is something incredibly unique, something that I haven't seen really anywhere else in the way that you guys are doing it, and how it helps differentiate the brewery from the other, nearly 7,000 breweries that are out there.
Yeah, well, being in California, we have good access to grapes. We're in Southern California, so sometimes you have to drive a little further to get good grapes. But essentially, we've developed relationships with winemakers, and I have a lot of respect for wine, even though I like beer better. And I don't know, it's wanted to kind of create a bridge between the beer world and the wine world and make wine drinkers or wine geeks more serious or more curious about beer. We've maybe 9 years ago we started doing these wine hybrids, first with crappier grapes just to kind of test it out, and sometimes they were good, sometimes not. Now we've invested in some winemaking equipment so we can essentially, come 3 weeks from now, maybe middle of October, our place will look like a winery. We'll have a destemmer and a crusher, and we'll do cold macerations to get some color out of the grapes. We'll brew a batch of beer, co-ferment them together with the grape skins, getting the tannins exposed to the wort, getting a lot of color as well, and then press it off, go into barrel, and cross your fingers.
And this is a product that you intend to, I guess, encourage wine drinkers to be more accepting of beer, but can it do the sort of inverse? Can it send your core beer drinkers into the wine category? Like, isn't that the risk?
Yeah, probably. Actually, there isn't much intent behind it other than it's interesting and we like doing it.
That's awesome.
That's the best intent.
All those noble things about bringing wine drinkers into beer. Nah, I don't really care. I just want to make cool things.
So have you? What's the response been to a product like that? Have you solicited any feedback directly?
Yeah, some people love it. They love just the different take they can get. The caramely notes from the malt. They got it's very much more wine forward than beer forward. But if you drink a nice cab alongside it, you can taste those beer notes, which is really fun, I think. And then people who hate wine are going to hate it. And we package it still. We put it in these heavy wine bottles with a cork. It drinks like wine. You don't put it in a pint glass. You put it in a nice cab or a nice Bordeaux glass, and it's just a different experience, but it's fun.
In general, do you find this type of exploration to be a positive way to innovate within the beer category and start to address some of the issues like beer drinkers gravitating towards the wine category?
Maybe. I don't know. We don't produce very much of it. It's a real pain in the ass to make this beer. Last year it was 15 barrels of that amount, and just went to one club, one of our societies, and then this year it's 30 barrels. So we're hoping to maybe meet demand this year for it. So not very many people will try it. Hopefully the right people will try it, but I don't know. It's just something we do out of our own interests.
Yeah, and I guess that brings up sort of a broader question: is like, where does innovation go from here?
And I think that for us specifically, innovation has to go back to consumer and back to what the hell we want to do and stand for as a brewery. Because I think if you don't have a perspective in terms of what innovation means to you, if you don't have this is the avenues that we're going to try to innovate on. For us, it's not going to be innovating within the hazy IPA category. It's going to be innovating more in this interesting hybridization of beer and wine. It's going to be working more with the resources and our local people that we have to leverage up kind of the ingredients, the experiences, and the things that we have in our backyard. And, hopefully people will find those interesting. I think that, years ago we saw, there was a Gallup poll that came out in 2012 that showed this happening. It showed from, I think it was 97 and what it was. It was 97 to 2012. The spread between beer, wine, and liquor was 43% said they were beer drinkers, 32% said they were wine drinkers, and 27% said they were spirits drinkers. And you saw all three of these lines converging. They came out with that. I showed it to my distributors. They were like, oh, 2012. So here we are. So now when you look at the modern day drinker, I'm one of them. I'm not quite a millennial. I'm slightly older, but I like to have a cocktail. I enjoy a glass of wine. I love beer. And so I think that if we can kind of push forward and kind of find what people are liking about these segments and maybe give them experiences, give them products, that they wanted before they knew that it was actually there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think too, to the earlier panel, we are, I think a shakeout is underway, and innovation is going to be absolutely critical for anybody who wants to sort of come out on the other side in a position of strength. But I also think that fear, the underlying reason to innovate is not fear. It's not fear, because if you innovate because you're afraid and you think you need to, then you're going to make bad judgments. You're going to try to be an innovator on something that you're not. But if you don't innovate, you're also going to, because you're afraid to take the risk, then you're going to fail too. So I think, look, the reason we all got into this business is because it's fun. This is a fun business. We get to do this for a living. And so I think leaning into that part of it and pushing the boundaries, being curious, is all the more critical as we go in. And fear is the thing that's going to, whether we're innovating or not, is going to cripple us as individual breweries and as an industry.
Yeah. Blaine, you talked about the honey issue. Patrick, you talked about this Yount product only being 15 barrels and maybe 30 barrels this year. When you finally land on something that you really love as a new innovative product, and that consumers are receptive to, how do you begin to scale, especially when there are so many challenges like the cost of producing a beer wine hybrid, or not being able to access the proper ingredients that you need to brew it at scale? How do you guys scale the innovations that could potentially be the next sort of big trend?
So I think we look at it in two ways. There's some things we make just because we're like, F it, we're never going to be able to scale this, so forget it, right? And you just know that that's it, right? The way we've looked at it too is to say, okay, maybe this was something that we can't scale, but what is it about this that we're making that consumers are gravitating towards? And then, is there a way that we can innovate on that to make it something that could actually be scalable? We talked about the rosé of the guava trees. That was a prime example where we were making an unscalable beer that we were infusing with just a ton of Zinfandel and Grenache and Syrah pumice, and going, I'm never going to be able to make this on scale. So then as we find out kind of what consumers are looking for from that beverage, now when we go to make that next evolution of that product, you make it with a guy's store. If people like this, can it scale? And so I think you start with kind of and there's certain projects that you just don't care if it scales, or that maybe you look and say, hey, this has been really popular. What is it about it that people like? And then innovate on that to see if there's actually something else there that has scalability.
Yeah. Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. I mean, and I think that comes just with getting base hits. We talk a lot about just getting base hits, and not everything needs to be something we can scale up and release to all the states we distribute it in, or even release to the market in general. So we have at our barrel aged and sour facility, we have 15 barrel aged beers coming out before the end of the year. And so, some of those are going to be really well received, some of them are not, some of them might be scalable, some of them might not. But the other thing I think is so important about that is it helps our team to just hone our craft. And when you get great reps in and you're hitting base hits, that's one, why our team got into this business, and two, you learn everything. You learn something every time you have a success or you have a failure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, kind of what Jeff was saying. I think making some interesting beers that maybe they're very small in production, but people are talking about, create a halo effect around your brand. So you don't need to scale it necessarily to see the success from it on a larger base than just that small amount of beer.
In other words, there's a way to scale the sort of visibility of it without scaling the actual product itself.
Right. But if possible, you try to look for ways that you can get a similar flavor experience without spending that much on grapes or going through that process. Trying not to dumb it down or try to get close, but if you can't, don't do it.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about product innovation, and with the last few minutes that we have, I want to talk a little bit about innovation in terms of business models. I'm going to kind of pose this question to Jeff. We talked a little bit about this on the last panel, but we've seen a variety of new business models emerging in the craft space, and a lot of private equity money flowing in. And you look at groups like Canarchy or like Artisanal Brewing Ventures, and these are sort of innovative ways of thinking about, okay, if there's a shakeout coming, if there's all these headwinds, how can we get brewers together to, remain in existence and be successful and kind of navigate the choppy waters ahead. as I guess a recovering private equity guy yourself, Jeff, what impact is that having on the space in general, and what does sort of the flow of all this money into the space allow companies to do from an innovation standpoint, and where's it going to take craft?
Yeah, as you mentioned, recovering private equity guy. I spent about 10 years doing that before I started doing this. I think that money is going to help. The big place where I think that consolidation helps is distribution, right? Because as a smaller brewery, that's the place where you walk in. I think Matt mentioned this earlier, but you walk into a distributor and you go from a half a point to 4 points, and you just you get the benefit of being associated with those other brands. So I think that's the single biggest one. In terms of innovation, though, I think that could help or could hurt, because money doesn't buy creativity. Money doesn't buy new ideas. People come up with ideas, and so I think where there's consolidation and where there are things where people are going to be able to continue to innovate as money comes in, it's going to be those investors that acknowledge the importance and centrality of people in their business and the importance of people in innovation. You can't pay for that. You have to, and I think those are going to also the firms that invest in ways that acknowledge the unique attributes of those brands and understand what they have credibility to and don't. And in my own experience in private equity, I've seen firms that do that really, really well, and firms that are really blind to it. So it doesn't necessarily scare me. I think because at the root, it's people that make innovation work and culture, and we can do that without big money. But we can also do it with big money, and it's great if you can get the big money. Great, but I think our job as independent brewers is to get up every morning, love what we do, find something new to do, find a new way to do it, and enjoy it as we go along.
Yeah, well said. I like that. Blaine, you come from the non-alcoholic world where there is a lot of private money, and there are some innovative beverages in the non-alcoholic space, and certainly that piece of the non-alcoholic world has expanded considerably over even the last 5 to 10 years. There are a ton of new innovative beverages, but in your experience from that world, what did the backing of some pretty, I guess, robust private equity firms or high net worth individuals do for innovation in non-alc? And now that we're starting to see it in beer, do you think it'll help? Do you think it'll hurt? Like, what's your take on it?
I think it goes both ways. I mean, and I really do. I think that especially at the beginning in non-alc, and so it's interesting we see this trend happen. In the beginning in non-alc, I think it kind of mirrors what you see in the craft beer space, where if you look at, and I'm put on my non-alc hat here, but you had like the acquisition of Sobe by Pepsi, right?
Yep.
And as soon as that thing's acquired, they just fire everybody, and that's it, and they put it into the blue system for the most part. And that's the death of innovation and the death of a brand, right? I think that you kind of saw that with some of the first acquisitions that you had here. For us at Honest, it was interesting because not only do we have private equity firms and high net individuals at the beginning that were just kind of like, let's give you some money, you guys go be creative, let it go. At the end, we were part of like a Nestle group and then part of a Coke group, right? And it's interesting to see these larger companies kind of learn, which is both good and scary at the same time. But that they're getting better at creating these brands and kind of letting them go more so. So I think you see a parallel in that in craft beer. It's a little bit more behind, I would say. So I think that what you're going to see is like these bigger companies are going to get better at letting these brands go. I think you're going to see more and more of these kind of things happening. However, I think fundamentally you have to believe in the consumer. I think that the consumer knows, and as long as you kind of are making partnerships and alignments, whether even if it's with a larger organization or private equity firm, and they're allowing you to be creative, then I think that you're going to be true to the consumer. Consumer will still continue to pull your product off the shelf.
Yeah. I'll give you all sort of the final word before we go have some beers. Final word on innovation, where you see everything going over the next couple years as it relates to innovation in the craft brewing sector, and just what the hell is going to happen to craft. I mean, where's everything headed? And I'll start with Patrick.
Boy. Well, I think our suppliers should be mentioned, that there's constantly new hop varieties coming on the market, and there's also new yeast varieties to deal with. We have a partnership with Berkeley Brewing Science that's doing kind of creating hop flavors or terpenes as a result of fermentation. So that's a pretty exciting thing that hopefully all of us will get to use soon. I think we just need to ignore what everybody else is making and make something that we think is delicious, and then we can find out that everybody else is making it as well.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, my word of advice that I give to myself and that I would give to especially brewers who are in like leadership positions in your companies is trust your people, let them make mistakes, and help them learn from them. It's really, really easy to view lost revenue, lost money as mistakes as a sort of mark on them. But you as a leader set the tone for how your organization deals with failure and whether you see it as an opportunity and something to learn from, or a failure and a mark on your team. And the reality is, if you have, I think that requires a tremendous amount of self-awareness about yourself, about your brand, about what you stand for, and also what you're not good at. I was the home brewer guy who came up with some of our original recipes in my garage, but I don't know how to run a brew house, so I hired a brewmaster because he knows what he's doing. So I think knowing yourself, knowing your team, and trusting them is at the heart of it.
And I think innovation goes back to kind of like having the core values of your company and what you believe in. And then, you heard the guys up here before, that's some really influential, good minds in the industry, great minds in the industry. And they're talking about backyard, share of mind, all these things. If you're thinking about mindful innovation, if your focus really does need to be your backyard, then be inspired by your backyard, right? Take the things around you, be inspired by them, whether that's different products, process, companies, or customers, and be inspired by those and be innovative around those products, because fundamentally those are going to be the ones that are going to resonate within that group. And I just think it's ironic that we'll probably be here in 7 years, if we're all still here, and we'll be talking about how innovative it was to have a flagship.
Nice. Well, big round of applause for these guys. Thank you for, Thank you for imparting some wisdom here today, and thank you guys all for attending our final meetup of the year. If you liked what we did here, we'll be in Santa Monica at the end of November for a 2-day conference. We hope to see you there. But in the meantime, let's have a beer. Cheers.